Good Thursday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for March the 23rd. Today, we're reading together in Leviticus chapter 11, which is going to begin a series of 5 chapters focusing on issues concerning things that are clean and unclean. We're going to talk in these chapters about food here in chapter 11, chapter 12, childbirth, chapter 13, skin diseases, chapter 14, cleansing of the skin diseases, and then finally in chapter 15, bodily discharges. Whenever we think about the issues of clean and unclean, it's probably important to remember at least that just because something was unclean did not mean that it was necessarily scratch that. Just because something was clean does not equally equate to holy, but everything that was holy would be clean. Being unclean does not necessarily mean sinful or loathsome. For example, childbirth. In childbirth, the woman was unclean, but that was not for a sinful thing. In fact, childbirth being one of the greatest blessings and graces that God has given us. So that certainly is not the case. But all of this, recognizing the distinctions between being clean and unclean, all of it leads to being like God, being holy in every way. So it was important for the people to understand the distinctions between that which is holy and unholy. And of course, the priest. This would be a good place to put for the priest, considering going back to verse number 10 and verses 8 through 11. There, Moses stresses to Aaron, or back up, Yahweh stresses to Aaron that the necessity of making sure that the priests, while they were serving in the temple, were not inhibited by alcohol of any sort, and that they were able to be sober in their thinking, so they can make proper distinctions between, as he says in verse number 10, you must distinguish between the holy and the common, the clean and the unclean, and teach the Israelites all the statutes that Yahweh has given to them through Moses. So this begins these 5 chapters, chapters 11 through 15, talk about these issues concerning cleanness and uncleanness. There's a couple of words that are used to, or there's a couple of Hebrew words that are associated with these ideas. So for the word clean, the Hebrew word is tahor, and this word could mean clean or normal, pure, hearty, natural, healthy, pristine, or sinless. And on the other side of the coin, the antonym to tahor would be tameh, which would mean unclean or abnormal, impure, unnatural, weak, ill, contaminated, or sinful. So whenever you think about, again, the negative in this sense, whenever you think about something being unclean or abnormal, there might be, again, an immediate, very strong negative connotation to that. But especially, as I mentioned, as we get into the childbirth chapter tomorrow, there's nothing abnormal or impure, unnatural, weak, ill about that. It is just the state that is not clean in a sense, and because it was unclean, there was a need to be very careful with it to make sure that the unclean state, the ceremonially unclean state of this one individual, did not in a sense rub off on others. Again, it's all about teaching about holiness, all about teaching to draw distinctions between that which is holy and common. And that's what we're doing here within these chapters, learning about Israel's commands to be a clean people and to be distinct from others around them. So let me get the text of Leviticus 11 up on the screen for us so we can read along together here. Leviticus 11, verse number 1. Leviticus 11, verse number 1, Yahweh spoke to Moses and Aaron. This time speaking to both of them, which I don't think I mentioned this, but back in chapter 10 and verses 8 through 11, I think, if I recall correctly, that's the only time that Yahweh speaks directly to Aaron. I think it's the only time that we have that throughout these texts. And then here, whenever Yahweh speaks to both Moses and Aaron, that again is a pretty uncommon. This is an uncommon occurrence. Normally, Yahweh is speaking to Moses, but here Yahweh does speak to Moses and Aaron and says, "Tell the Israelites, you may eat all these kinds of land animals. You may eat any animal with divided hooves and that chews the cud. But among the ones that chew the cud or have divided hooves, you are not to eat these. So if they chew the cud or have divided hooves, they cannot eat them, not if they're together." So here's the examples: camels, though they chew the cud, do not have divided hooves, they are unclean for you. Hyraxes, though they chew the cud, do not have hooves, they are unclean for you. Hares, though they chew the cud, do not have hooves, they are unclean for you. And finally, pigs, rest in peace, bacon for the Jews, though they have divided hooves, do not chew the cud, they are unclean for you. Do not eat any of their meats or touch their carcasses, they are unclean for you. This is what you may eat from all that is in the water. You may eat everything in the water that has fins and scales, whether in the seas or streams. But these are to be abhorrent to you. Everything in the seas or streams that does not have fins and scales among all the swarming things and other living creatures in the water, they are to remain abhorrent to you. You must not eat any of their meat, and you must abhor their carcasses. Everything in the water that does not have fins and scales will be abhorrent to you. So I think here in this instance, interjecting here, I think like a catfish. Pretty sure a catfish would be unclean for them. Yes, it has scale. Yes, it has fins, but it does not have scales. It has that kind of I don't know, leathery type of skin. It has a soft skin, not a scaly skin, so that would not count. I would also say something along the lines of like I'm trying to think of something that has scales but not fins. I don't know. I guess some kind of water snakes might be something as well that they would not be able to partake of. So it had to have scales and fins. Verse 13, you are to abhor these birds. They must not be eaten because they are abhorrent. Eagles, bearded vultures, Egyptian vultures, kites, and any kind of falcon, every kind of raven, ostriches, short-eared owls, gulls, any kind of hawk, little owls, cormorants, long-eared owls, barn owls, eagle owls, ospreys, storks, any kind of heron, hippos, and bats. All winged insects that walk on all fours are to be abhorrent to you, but you may eat those of all the winged insects that walk on all fours, those who have jointed legs above their feet for hopping on the ground. You may eat these, any kind of locust, katydid, grasshopper, or cricket and grasshopper, but all other winged insects that have 4 feet are to be abhorrent to you. So I'm guessing something along the lines of beetles and stuff of that nature. Verse 24, these will make you unclean. Whoever touches their carcasses will be unclean until evening, and whoever carries away any of their carcasses is to wash his clothes and will be unclean until evening. All animals that have hooves but do not have a divided hoof and do not chew the cud are unclean for you. Whoever touches them becomes unclean. All the 4-footed animals that walk on their paws are unclean for you. Whoever touches their carcasses will be unclean until evening, and anyone who carries their carcasses is to wash his clothes and will be unclean until evening. They are unclean for you. These creatures that swarm on the ground are unclean for you: weasels and mice, any kind of large lizard, gecko, monitor lizards, common lizards, skinks, and chameleons. These are unclean for you among all the swarming creatures. Whoever touches them when they are dead will be unclean until evening. When any one of them dies and falls on anything, it becomes unclean. Any item of wood, clothing, leather, sackcloth, or any impediment used for work, it is to be rinsed with water and will remain unclean until evening. Then it will be clean. If any of them falls into a clay pot, or if any of them falls into any clay pot, everything in it will be unclean. You are to break it. Any edible food coming into contact with unclean water will become unclean, and any drinkable liquid in any container will become unclean. Anyone or anything one of their carcasses falls on will become unclean. If it is an oven or stove, it is to be smashed. It is unclean and will remain unclean for you. A spring or cistern containing water will remain clean, but someone who touches a carcass in it will become unclean. If one of their carcasses falls on any seed that is to be sown, it is clean. But if water has been put on the seed and one of their carcasses falls on it, it is unclean for you. If one of the animals that you use for food dies, anyone who touches its carcass will be unclean until evening. Anyone who eats some of its carcass is to wash his clothes and will be unclean until evening. Anyone who carries its carcass must wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. All the creatures that swarm on the earth are abhorrent. They must not be eaten. Do not eat any of the creatures that swarm on the earth, anything that moves on its belly or walks on all fours or on many feet, for they are abhorrent. So we're talking like centipedes. Snakes would be included here for sure. I think that's about it that I can think of on top of my head right here. But it says they are abhorrent. Verse 43, do not become contaminated by any creature that swarms. Do not become unclean or defiled by them, for I am Yahweh your God. So you must consecrate and be holy, because I am holy. Do not defile yourselves by any swarming creature that crawls on the ground, for I am Yahweh who brought you up from the land of Egypt to be your God. So you must be holy, because I am holy. This is the law concerning animals, birds, all living creatures that move in the water, and all creatures that swarm on the ground, in order to distinguish between the clean and the unclean, between the animals that may be eaten and those that may not be eaten. And that is Leviticus chapter 11, the laws concerning what they can eat. So there's just a number of things that can be said here. There's a lot of unknown. There are a lot of, I think, decently educated guesses that people make in order to try to figure out where the line is drawn here between these various animals. But one thing that I think is a good thought is that these dietary restrictions serve to reflect the holiness of God, that not just anything goes, that this creates a distinction between Israel and pagan neighbors. And one of the things this did is this allowed the Israelites from assimilating with their pagan neighbors, because the diet of the pagans, some of the things that they ate certainly were not allowable by Yahweh here concerning the people of Israel. So food being such a easy way to show fellowship and to show camaraderie. Often within scripture already, we have seen a number of times in which a meal serves as a sign of fellowship. This could not be enjoyed between Israel and their surrounding pagan neighbors, because they would eat things that Israel simply could not eat, therefore maintaining their distinction. But again, what are the purpose of the lines here that are drawn? What criteria is Yahweh using in order to designate this thing is clean and this thing is unclean? There is no absolute answer, I don't believe. I think some of the elements I'm going to share with you, some of the hypotheses, do have some credence, but I don't think they can be carried out to the fullest extent. So it might be where certain bits and pieces of these various hypotheses might be in play, but I don't think just one particular hypothesis is at play here. So, for example, some people think that this is hygienic, that unclean animals were unfit for human consumption, for they were more likely to carry diseases or contamination. That might be the case, but if that's the case, then why are they allowed to eat it later on once Jesus comes and his covenant is established? Why, if they're nasty and contaminated then, why would that cease to be the case by the time Peter comes around and does his thing in Acts chapter 10? So it just shows there might be some truth to that, but not in its entirety. I just thought too about whenever it comes to things in the water, shrimp do not have scales, do not have fins. Same thing for mussels, crabs, lobsters, all that kind of stuff. So those would be excluded from what can be eaten as well. Some others think that this could be cultic in nature, kind of what I just mentioned about not being able to assimilate into the pagans around them. Unclean animals were associated with non-Israelite deities. You can see Isaiah chapter 65 verse 4 about that. And maybe that explains some of the reason for why they can do what they can do. But again, that doesn't carry out in every way. Some think that this is just arbitrary, that Yahweh just decides, hey, I like this animal for you to eat, and I don't like this animal for you to eat. The dietary laws taught holiness and obedience to Israel. God was simply teaching the nation how to make divisions and distinctions. Because he made divisions and distinctions according to this view, the choice of animal prohibited was arbitrary. The true reason for the prohibitions against eating was that it was simply the will of God. Maybe there's some truth to that as well. So other people talk about it being symbolic, that each unclean animal symbolized more important spiritual things, revealing how Israel had to live. For example, according to this one particular document, chewing cud reminded people of meditation on the law, like you would chew on the precepts of the law. Others suggest that unclean animals were carnivorous, and that unclean animals were carrion eating. Thus, the dirty habits of some animals spoke of the filth of iniquity. So think about maybe like pigs. Pigs like to roll around in the mud. You don't want to do that as a person, therefore you don't want to eat that which does the same thing. Others would say that the meaning for these restrictions was both practical and symbolic, that Israel had to remain a separate nation, and dietary laws made it difficult to associate with pagans who ate these things. I mentioned that a bit before. One of the things I never thought about before that I thought was very interesting, again, these are all just suggestions, these are hypotheses. We're not given any sort of direct answer as to why Yahweh showed these particular things. I think we might be able to answer the what, the kind of the why behind it, as far as what was the teaching purpose of this. That seems to be indicated in verse 44, where it says, "For I am Yahweh your God, so that you must consecrate yourselves and be holy, because I am holy. Do not defile yourselves by any swarming creature that crawls on the ground, for I am holy. Or I am Yahweh, who brought you up from the land of Egypt to be your God. You must be holy, because I am holy, because I am so set apart. You must show your ability to be set apart by not eating of these various things." But just one more that I will share with you. Two more ideas, just thoughts, things to think about and to consider. One writer, Cass, suggests that the main point is separation. If Israel was wholly separate from the world to Yahweh, then it had to learn to make the same distinctions that Yahweh had made in creation. So this particular writer bases the distinctions in creation. So he would say this, that using the principles of place, kind, motion, and form that are all found in Genesis chapter 1, this particular commentator, Cass, analyzes the contents of Leviticus 11 according to the following classifications. There were creatures that have no proper or ambiguous place, therefore amphibians, because they don't have a set place, they're out. There are creatures that have no proper form, so incompletely cloven-footed animals, because their feet are not fully formed, they're out. Creatures that violate proper locomotion, so water animals that walk, they don't swim like fish are supposed to swim, therefore they're out. And then finally, creatures that violate the original dietary code, showing no respect for life, so carnivorous animals, they were out as well. Although I don't know how that would fit with certain fish that might eat other fish, because even fish like bass eat other fish. So I don't know exactly how that will work. Again, there are weaknesses and strengths of these various hypotheses. Finally, this other writer, Milgram, he emphasizes that this chapter taught Israel the importance of and respect for life. He suggests that this is the missing piece to complete the rationale for the dietary system. God was teaching Israel reverence for life he created, by reducing their choices to a few animals, by limiting the ways these animals could be killed, and by prohibiting blood. So that is his thought as to the dietary restrictions, why there were so many animals that could not be eaten, why the number was much smaller than what we have today. Again, just something to think about as we get into this read over the next few days here in Leviticus chapter 11 through 15, talking about the unclean and the clean, the common and the holy, the pure and the impure, and just various aspects of religious life for the Israelites. Tomorrow we will read together in chapter 12. It's only a short, I think, 8 verses, and then we'll read chapter 13 as well. And then we'll turn around on Saturday and talk about the cleansing of the skin diseases that is discussed in chapter 13. So tomorrow we'll read chapter 12 and 13. Saturday, get to 14, and then we'll keep on chugging on from there. I appreciate so much you taking time to read along with me on this Thursday. I hope you have a great rest of your Thursday, and we'll be back at it tomorrow as we read together from chapter 12 and 13, talking about purification after childbirth and issues concerning skin diseases. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys. Have a great day. Take care. God bless.